Humanistic theories of personality. Humanistic theories are optimistic about the core of human nature. Right. So as we go over the different perspectives of personality, there's always a couple key words to make sure you pay attention to. One of the key words for humanistic theory is it's very positive, right? Overall, the humanistic perspective of psychology is usually the most positive perspective. So they say personality is driven by needs to adapt and learn, rather than unconscious conflicts or defense mechanisms and anxiety, like what the psychodynamic theory says. They say that mental disorders occur when a person is in an unhealthy situation that causes low self-esteem and unmet needs, not from unhealthy individuals. Right? So that's key. They believe everyone, is initially healthy. They're just in an unhealthy situation. And if you remember, they talk about low self-esteem and unmet needs. If you remember Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? Maslow is a humanistic psychologist, right? So, that pyramid of needs aren't being met. Speaking of Abraham Maslow, here we go. Abraham Maslow has the most famous humanistic perspective, which was the hierarchy of needs. Now, the most famous humanistic psychologist was probably Carl Rogers, but he has the most famous perspective in the hierarchy of needs. He said we needed something that described good mental health as more than just the absence of illness. Maslow saw a group of people in pursuit of higher ideals and wanted a way to explain their behavior. So if you remember, if you've met all your needs, at the top of the pyramid is something called self-actualization, right? And that's what he's talking about here. Self-actualizing personalities. Healthy individuals who have met their basic needs and are free to be creative and fulfill their potentials. Now make sure you remember this is what Maslow calls this, because Carl Rogers is going to call this something else. Speaking of Carl Rogers, here we go. Another famous humanist was Carl Rogers, who took a different approach. He identified healthy personalities as the fully functioning person, right? So where Abraham Maslow calls it self-actualizing, Carl Rogers calls it fully functioning. So he says a fully functioning person is an individual who has a self-concept that is positive and congruent with reality. Right? And so that's key. If your perspective is the same as reality, right, and is positive, now we're on the track to becoming a fully functioning person. He also used a technique of active listening. Active listening is when the listener will echo, restate, and clarify what the person says. Right? So hopefully, you guys are active listeners. Maybe when you're talking to your friends and they have a problem, right? You pay attention, you clarify what they say. So a lot of times when someone's talking to you, you'll do like a clarifying statement. Oh, is this what you're talking about? Is this what you meant? Right? Sometimes you restate what they say, you echo what they say. Your textbook has at least I know the old textbook that had a picture of someone, being an active listener and showing empathy. To continue on with the humanistic perspective, Carl Rogers, who lived from 1902 to 1987, focused on growth and fulfillment of individuals, right? Remember we talked about it as a very positive perspective. So it's all about growing as a person, fulfilling, your individual needs. So he said it required, there's three conditions that are required to become fully functioning. One is to be genuine, right? You have to be a genuine person. You gotta drop the facade, right? So pretty much stop being fake and be real, right? Be genuine. The next one was acceptance, right? So you need to have acceptance. And this is unconditional positive regard, which you see the definition right below, right? Unconditional positive regard is an attitude of total acceptance towards another person, right? A conditional positive regard is when you only accept them for certain things. If you're a therapist, you might hear a lot of crazy things that your client says. You need to have unconditional positive regard. Accept them for who they are. And the last one is empathy, right? You must show empathy with the person. which is to have an understanding of what they're going through. A couple key terms from the humanistic perspective, besides the ones that have already been bolded, is the self, right? Self-concept, self-esteem, self-serving bias. So they all start with self, so a lot of people get them confused. So make sure you concentrate on the difference between these three. Self-concept is all our thoughts and feelings about ourselves in an answer to the question, who am I, right? So self-concept, you're just trying to answer the question, who am I? Whereas self-esteem is one's feelings of high or low self-worth, right? Do you feel yourself as worthy or not? Self-concept is, who are you? And self-serving bias is a readiness to perceive oneself favorably. So this is something we've talked about before. In self-serving bias, you always see yourself as kind of better than maybe what you actually are, or better than other people. So I always use sports as analogies. Let's say, you're playing basketball and you guys win. You're like, hey, did you see how many rebounds I had? Did you see how many points I had? And if you lose, it's always someone else's fault, right? Oh, why didn't you play better defense? Why didn't you do this? Right? So self-serving bias is where you always perceive yourself favorably in the situation. Individualism, giving priority to one's own goals over group goals, and defining one's identity in terms of personal attributes rather than group identifications. So we're talking about individualistic versus collectivist societies. And then we're going to go through, there's going to be a chart on the next slide. Collectivist society, they give priorities to goals of one's group, so often one's extended family or work group, and defining one's identity accordingly. All right, so in a Western society like the U.S., we live in an individualistic society. We focus more on our own personal goals and our own uniqueness rather than the collective goal, which a collectivist society would focus on. So here's a chart, right? So this chart shows the value contrast between individualism and collectivism. So the concept you have on the left here, right? So like self in an individualism type country, very independent, right? You identify from individual traits. In a collectivist society, interdependent, right? You identify from belonging, right? So you get your identity based off what group you belong to. Life task. In an individualistic country, you discover and express one's uniqueness. In a collectivist society or culture, you maintain connections. It's all about fitting in, being part of that group, because that's what you identify with. So the concept of what matters, individualism, it's all about me. It's all about the personal achievement and fulfillment, rights and liberties, right? We see this a lot now, and some people are getting confused with what their rights are and what their liberties are, which that's what we stress, especially in the United States, because we are a free country. It's all about our rights. But some people don't realize that you do have rights and freedoms unless it harms other people, and then those aren't rights and freedoms that you have. Where in a collectivism culture, it's all about the we, group goals and solidarity, social responsibilities and relationships. The concept of coping method, how do you cope in individualistic cultures? You change your reality, right? You change your reality to cope with things. In collectivism, you accommodate reality, right? You accommodate reality. Morality in individual cultures is defined by individuals, right? It's self-based, right? My morality might be different than your morality. In a collectivism society, it is defined by social networks, right? It's based off duties. Everyone has their role to play. Relationships in individualism, many often temporary or casual. Confrontation is acceptable. Right? A lot of people, they're fine with confrontation. Especially you can even see like with social media, it's all about casual relationships. You look at the hundreds or thousands of followers you have on different social media. websites, and how well do you really know those people? Where in collectivism, relationships are few but close and enduring. Harmony is valued. It's all about getting along. And the last concept is attributing behaviors. In individualism, behaviors reflect one's personality and attitudes. In collectivism, behaviors reflect social and roles. And the last slide. So criticism. Remember, we're going to talk about criticism, so pretty much every perspective has it. So people criticize humanistic concepts as being fuzzy. Like, what is self-actualization, right? So they're saying, reality isn't this positive. It's great to be an optimist, but bad things like do happen. So it's very fuzzy. Self-actualization is very like general. So what actually is it? So for a long time, self-esteem was thought to cause people to act the way they do. More recently, psychologists have argued that self-esteem isn't the cause of behavior, but rather a byproduct of behavior. So which one do you think is it? Does self-esteem cause you to act a certain way? Or is based off your actions is the reason why you have like low self-esteem or high self-esteem? So think about that and be ready to discuss.